The three realms. What do I refer to when I use that phrase? In the context of modern Druidic paganism, in talking about three realms, I'm referring to the notion that for most of, if not all of, the ancient Indo-European cultures, the view of the cosmos included three distinct realms, most generally seen as an upper world, a lower world, and a middle world. The way in which these realms were pictured seems to have varied from individual culture to individual culture. For the ancient pagan Indians, the Vedic peoples of India, who were one Indo-European culture, the three realms included the heavens, which is to say the sky, where the fiery beings existed, a point to which I'll return shortly, an oceanic world below, and then what was thought of as the atmosphere, that being the middle world in which we human beings live. Because, of course, we don't go around in the earth, we go around above the earth, in the atmosphere, where we can breathe. The Norse people had a somewhat more elaborate system, or at least what survives to us in mythology was somewhat more elaborate. They saw the universe as divided into worlds above, worlds below, and worlds in the middle, all arrayed along the axis of the world tree, Yggdrasil, so that there were three realms above among the branches of the tree, three below held within the roots of the tree, and then three middle worlds, including our own, which they knew as Midgard, in the center, defined by the axis of the trunk of the tree. We don't have a very clear picture of three realms bequeathed to us by the ancient Celtic peoples. And so for much of this discussion, particularly in the latter portions of the discussion, I'm going to be talking about this world and the other worlds in general terms. But as we'll see shortly, it's possible to view some of the Celtic descriptions of the other worlds, which appear to be laid out upon a horizontal plane, as referring perhaps to, at least indirectly or metaphorically, the sky, a point to which I'll return at least once. We are, in all of these views of three realms, seem to be living in the middle world. And some of mythology and much of religious ritual is structured in a way that is understood against the backdrop of these separate and distinct realms, one of which is generally the abode of people, and others of which are more generally the abodes of supernatural beings like the gods and goddesses, the ancestors, and certain other spirits. Let's now take a look at each of these realms in general terms, each in turn, and then we'll look at some of the notions that are specific to the Celtic peoples and their view of this world and the other worlds. Before looking at the upper world and the lower world specifically, it's worth at least glancing at the notion of the middle world as somehow either mediating between or being a product of interaction between those two worlds, again, the upper and the lower worlds. It seems that in the context of Indo-European paganism, perhaps even Proto-Indo-European paganism, the very earliest roots of the pagan religions and cosmologies, that is to say the world pictures of the descendant Indo-European cultures, including that of the Celts, there was an overarching myth that involved the union of a sky father and an earth mother. In more general terms, there is a distinctive interaction between the fire associated in a certain sense with the celestial bodies above, a point to which I'll return, and the water of the realm below. That fire is perhaps generated out of water, as indeed perhaps the earth on which we live, the middle world, is generated out of water. And this dynamic interaction between the fiery power of the sky and the formative potential of the subterranean realms, the deep ocean places, coming together and interacting is what generates and sustains the cosmos as we human beings experience it. So there is, in a certain sense, a kind of an overarching masculine and feminine dichotomy to the universe. And in looking at myths in which these forces are embodied in individual deities, it's certainly fair to use those terms. But masculine and feminine may perhaps be too anthropomorphic, and in other words, too human-specific. And it's worth thinking perhaps of the generative, the dynamic, the positive in the sense of active component to the universe, and the potential, the indwelling, or even perhaps the chaotic and unformed component to the cosmos. And it is the union or interaction of these that gives rise to and sustains the ongoing creative act that is the cosmos as, again, we experience it. Let's consider the realm below now, the lower world. This we can call, if the upper world is the celestial world, the chthonic world, C-H-T-H-O-N-I-C, or perhaps more simply the subterranean world. This is the land that's accessed through caves, the land under lake that is seen in some Celtic mythology, the land in the burial tombs, portal tombs that were used in very ancient times as not merely burial places but ritual places for dealing with the dead. In more general terms, the lower world is the boundless, fathomless ocean, not the freshwater places that bring life, but the unknowable, fathomless depths of the salt ocean. It is within that place that, in the Irish mythology, the chaotic demons, the Fomorians, dwell. And there is, therefore, a distinction between the celestial realm of the gods and the chthonic world of other beings, including adversarial beings. Again, to turn to the Vedic evidence from India, in the direction from which the so-called fathers, meaning the generalized ancestors, came, the demonic beings could be found as well. And sometimes it was said that the demonic beings would come in the guise of the fathers from that same direction. So there is clearly a linking within this generally, we could say, primordial, or even simply primal realm below, of beings like the chaotic demonic figures, but also the revered ancestors who've passed on into their burial places. We see the lower world often as accessed through shafts or wells. The well, generally speaking, can be seen as a source of making. It can be seen as a source of knowing. There is, as I've suggested earlier, a link between the waters, the deep waters of the well, and the source of fire. So in this sense, it is that the well can be the source of knowing. Offerings, just as they could be made into the fire to get to the upper world, were very often made into shafts or springs or wells, skulls, and other important items were often found in the foundations of dwelling places. For another Indo-European people, the Greeks, at times openings were created in burial places, in graves, so that drink could be poured down into, literally, the dwelling place of the ancestors in their graves. In addition to being a realm of primordial potential, we can see the realm below as being the abode of the sovereignty goddess, and perhaps even of the mother of all being generally. There is a frequent identification, at least in naming, between a sovereignty goddess and a local river, and more generally, the name of what is often seen as a primordial mother figure, Danu, equates to a word for river in more than one of the Indo-European languages. So rivers and springs, the sources of rivers, can be identified with a goddess figure, with a goddess in the land, a source of nourishment and fertility, and offerings were often found to have been made in these places. A sovereignty goddess might be linked to an important feature in the land, such as an important hilltop or mound. In southwest Ireland, for example, the interesting figure of Anya, who in latter times was regarded as a fairy queen, is linked to a significant hilltop, Cnochaine, and processions were made at around the summer solstice time by torchlight at the top of her mound to honor her. In addition to being a realm of a sovereignty figure, a sovereignty goddess, a goddess in the land, the realm below, as I've already suggested, can be seen as the abode of the dead. Tombs, passage tombs, portal tombs, structures that were used not only to inter the dead but also for ritual purpose, appear to be, symbolically at least, artificial caves, openings into the underworld, places where the lower world dwellings of the dead could be accessed for ritual purpose. But also islands were seen as places in the other world. Chakdin, which was seen as the House of Dun, or the Lord of the Dead, was an island to the southwest off the coast of Ireland. So it was linked to the sea, again reinforcing this overall pattern of seeing the dead as somehow linked to the lower world. The lower world, in general terms, again being seen as the place of primordial potential. So in a sense, where the dead might return after their life in the middle world to sojourn, perhaps to begin another life after a period of time spent apart. The third of the three realms is, of course, the middle world, that place in which we live. This world is familiar to us. It's the realm of the senses. It is the abode of, first of all, people. It is the abode of the other animals and the plants, as well as the physical substance, the rocks, the soil, that allow we living beings to live, to carry on our lives. It can also be seen as the abode of other spirits, perhaps non-human or being similar to human, who have different sorts of existences, perhaps not corporeal existences, but who are nevertheless seen to be perhaps abroad in our middle world, to have an ongoing existence, a continuous existence here. But the middle world is interesting in that not just myth, but also the accounts of folk tales suggest that it is constantly interpenetrated by the other worlds. And now we can just start to use that term, which is so often applied to the Celtic conception of the non-middle world realms, the other places, the other worlds. That this world is constantly interpenetrated by the other worlds, the abodes of ancestors, the abodes of powerful non-human spirits, the abodes of the gods and goddesses who might visit this place or have lived in it in the past. And this interpenetration may be profound, it may be fully tangible, in the sense that these visitations into our realm may involve sight, sound, all the senses, or they may be less obvious. We may hear, for example, the music of the fairy realms. This is a frequent theme in folk tales of encounters with the other world. Snatches of fairy music may be heard, but their source may not ever be seen. Alwyn and Brinley Rees, in their book, the book Celtic Heritage, have an excellent description of this notion of the other world and how ephemeral and elusive it is. And I think they describe it and its essential mystery better than I can. So I'm going to read a brief piece of Chapter 18 of Celtic Heritage by Rees and Rees. They say, to the questions, where is the other world? Is it one or many? The answers furnished by myth are contradictory. It is the, quote, lower half of Ireland, the land under the earth, or the she-mounds. It is also, quote, the land under the wave, an island, or a whole series of islands beyond the sea. Yet it can manifest itself in other places. A mist falls upon us in an open plain, and lo, we are there witnessing its wonders. We go to sleep in the enchanted land, and by morning all has disappeared, or we have been mysteriously retransported to our own homes. The limits of such a world cannot be defined in terms of distance or direction. Situated far beyond the horizon, it is the goal of the most perilous journey in the world. Present, unseen all round us, it can break in upon us, quote, in the twinkling of an eye, unquote. Stranger still, it can be two things at once. In the adventure of Bran, even the opposition of land and water is effaced in the plain of delight. This is, I think, a good picture and a fertile one of the middle world as being a place where the other worlds, say of water and air, or air and fire, or fire and water, interact and interface and interpenetrate. Rees and Rees also comment, I think interestingly, that this interaction of the other worlds with our middle world can have positive or negative outcomes seen from the human perspective. And also that, as one looks at various tales, these interactions may be initiated by otherworldly beings or can be initiated by human beings here within the middle world. Let's consider then this notion of traveling to the other worlds. If there are other realms above and below, then it's certainly sensible to think in terms of journeys of ascent, of moving upwards, and journeys of descent, traveling downwards, but also following the sort of generalized description that I just read from Rees and Rees's book, Celtic Heritage, of the particular Celtic variety of images of the other worlds. Also voyages, journeys that appear to be travel in the horizontal direction. So we'll look briefly at each of these. Looking at ascent, there are a couple of important ways that one can ascend. The most obvious of these is to go up a mountain or a hilltop. We have, for example, in the Christian tradition in Ireland, the ascent up Croagh Patrick, which traditionally, it's a penitential climb up a mountain that's undertaken at what was, and probably in a certain sense still is, an important pagan festival at Lunasa. This climb is undertaken in a certain sense to strengthen one's relationship with the divine. As has been noted, at least in passing already, hilltops were important places for the lighting of ritual fires. And it stands to reason that by going up to the highest point of an important hilltop and lighting a significant seasonal fire, one was attempting to get as close to the beings to whom one would be addressing the work at the fire as was possible. Anyone who's looked into shamanic traditions around the world also knows that another means of passage to the upper world is through the use of a tree or other similar world pillars, if you will. The lodge pole of a dwelling place, or other carved pillars, sacred pillars of one sort or another. Trees do have sacred associations in any number of Indo-European contexts, including in the Irish legends, where there are several significant special trees of Ireland, sacred trees of Ireland. For example, the yew tree and individual yews that are named and given locations around Ireland are seen as particularly sacred. Such a tree has the name of a bille, B-I-L-E, in the Irish language. And so the tree is not without sacred character in Celtic tradition, just as they often are important to shamans around the world in terms of accessing the other worlds, particularly the upper world. And again, I want to refocus attention on the notion of passing through the mist as being, at least metaphorically in the myths, a passage into the upper world, into a celestial realm. We see examples of this more than one place in the Irish tradition. Encounters with Manannán mac Lir, the sea god who I've already mentioned, who is seen as a king in the other worlds, are often accomplished by traveling to a world on the other side of the mist, or, as I've also suggested, on the other side of the waves. So at least, as I say, metaphorically, symbolically, this can be seen as a journey of ascent. Looking at the notion of descending, and this is a kind of journey that shamans around the world will undertake, the cave is obviously an important access point for descent. We have important associations with, for example, the cave of Cruachan in Ireland as having underworld, otherworldly associations. In the Christian tradition, just as we had the penitential climb up Kirkpatrick, there is the pilgrimage destination of Patrick's Purgatory, which is a cave or cave-like structure. It's been more than one thing down through the centuries, on an island in Loch Gerrig in Ireland, where pilgrims would go to be confined, and it was understood that they would there experience something of what would await them after death. This, as with the climb up the mountain, was seen as penitential in the Christian tradition. So the cave and symbolic caves like tomb openings are seen as passage places into the lower world, the realm particularly of the dead. I've suggested that in at least the Celtic tradition there are also journeys on the horizontal plane, which is to say towards the horizons, literally. Among the species of narratives in Irish tradition, there are ectri, which means adventures, and imramra, an imram meaning more specifically a voyage. Some of the passages through the mist that I've suggested can be found in Irish mythology fall into the category of the ectra. An imram is seen as a sea voyage, and often these are journeys to fantastical islands which have specific characteristics or have beings living on them that have specific characteristics. These imramra are found to be both of pagan in origin and more specifically of Christian era origin. But all of these tales, both the Ektri and the Imramra, suggest the ability of human beings to set out from where they are, figuratively at the center of the world, and pass beyond a certain point or a certain kind of boundary, and then encounter an otherworldly place, a place that may be, as I say, on the other side of the mist or on the other side of the sea. And this extends to things like even the Isle of Avalon, a place where the honored dead may have traveled by passage by boat. Equating the passages to the other worlds in Celtic mythology with the work of the shaman in cultures like those of, say, Siberia is a bit controversial. It's suggested in some quarters that shamanism as a term ought to be restricted to those sort of North Asian cultural contexts. And that might be fair to say. But we certainly see examples of individuals who travel out of the mundane reality and encounter the divine or the fantastical as a result of their journeys. And the word ecstasy is often used as synonymous with shamanic journey. And the word ecstasy is herein being used in a very particular way. The root of the word really meaning out of place. And so to travel out of the place from which one starts, where one finds oneself initially, can be seen as ecstatic, and therefore at least loosely equivalent to the work of the shaman in journeying out of the mundane world and into, say, the upper or the lower worlds. And so in a moment, we're going to do a visualization working with at least one fairly common tool of the shaman, which is to say the tree as the focal point for a journey out of the mundane world to the upper or the lower world. Often the shaman will see him or herself as ascending the tree towards the upper world. Often the shaman will find an entrance place among the roots of the tree to journey into the lower worlds. We're not going to try to induce shamanic trance in the journey that follows. We're just going to use this for the purposes of visualization. But hopefully this will give you an opportunity to at least get a glimpse of what the notion of an upper world and a lower world might mean for you. For the purposes of the visualization that follows, you should begin by having a lit candle before you, seated in a comfortable position supported by a comfortable chair or on the floor or the earth. If you need to, at this time, pause the recording until you have a candle lit and are comfortably positioned, ready to do the work of visualizing. With the flame before you, you are held by the earth beneath you. Take the bright light of the flame into you, into your mind's eye. Close your eyes, holding the vision of the flame in your vision eye. Let that flame fill your inner eye as you breathe comfortably and easily. Let the light of the flame expand to be the light of the sun in a blue sky. Under the sky before you, two things: a majestic tree and a well at the foot of the tree. First, approach and turn your attention to the depths of the well. The water is dark, the well is deeper then you can see to the bottom of. Do you see a light deep in the depths of the well? Gaze deep into the waters. Perhaps you can touch the water. Perhaps you can even enter the water. Explore now the deepest depths of the well, extending deep, deep, deep below.